Jax's revenge domain.
Shut down your workstation and leave the building. Marcus Hayes stood at my desk, arms crossed, checking his Apple Watch like he had somewhere more important to be. No good morning, no explanation. Just an order delivered like he was doing me a favor. I'm Carl Henderson, 58 years old, and I've been working systems engineering for 30 years. Started right after my Navy discharge in 1994, submarine reactor technician turned civilian contractor. Long enough to know when someone's about to make a mistake they can't take back. It was 11:15 on a Wednesday morning. My workstation wasn't just any computer. It was the only terminal with direct access to our defense contractor's monitoring feed, a secure connection tracking satellite ground operations for a 3x20% annual contract. 18 jobs riding on that money. My retirement fund, my grandson's college tuition that I'd promised my daughter I'd help cover. Department of Defense compliance audit starting in exactly 6 hours, and Marcus wanted me to power it down. "You want me to log out of the monitoring software?" I said, keeping my voice level, "or full system shutdown." He glanced at that watch again, then back at me. "Don't overcomplicate this, Carl. Complete shutdown." Now, I could have reminded him about the audit, could have mentioned that client security protocols required 72 hours to reauthenticate any terminal that disconnected improperly. Could have pointed out that I'd sent him the compliance memo 4 times in the past 8 months, each one more detailed than the last. But 14 months of working under Marcus had taught me something important. He didn't want to hear it. He'd been hired as VP of Digital Operations with a mandate to modernize our systems. In practice, that meant dismissing anything that couldn't fit on a PowerPoint slide. He'd told me once during a budget meeting that my focus on legacy protocols was holding back innovation. Said we needed to stay agile instead of getting bogged down in bureaucracy. The guy had an MBA from Columbia and 8 years of consulting experience. What he didn't have was any understanding of how defense contracts actually work. Or what happens when you mess with systems that people's livelihoods depend on. So I didn't argue. I turned to my screen and started the shutdown sequence. The console flickered through its warnings, disconnecting live stream, terminating processes, severing data feed. Each confirmation prompt felt heavier than the last. 90 seconds to dismantle a system I'd built from scratch back in 2003, right after the post-9/11 security overhaul. Back when I still believed that doing good work was enough to protect you from bad management. The screen went black. The cooling fans wound down. I opened the system audit log and typed. Client monitoring feed terminated per management instruction. 11:17 a.m. Wednesday. Clean, factual, timestamped. The kind of entry that stays in a database forever. "Leave your badge on the desk," Marcus said. I unclipped it from my belt and set it down next to my coffee mug. The mug had USS Pittsburgh printed on it, a reminder of my 6 years keeping reactor systems running 400 feet underwater. Different job, same principle. Some systems don't forgive shortcuts. Am I coming back today? He gave me that smile he used when he thought he'd won something. "We'll see. Take the rest of the day. I've got this handled." He walked away before I could respond, phone already out, thumbs moving across the screen, probably texting Terry Walsh, our CEO, about how he'd finally dealt with the old school guy who was slowing down digital transformation. I sat there for maybe a minute. Around me, the office hummed along like nothing had happened. Diana Torres, our junior systems analyst, looked up from her cubicle 2 rows over. She'd been watching the whole thing, I could tell. Smart kid, recent engineering grad, reminded me of myself 30 years ago. Back when I thought experience mattered less than enthusiasm. Marcus had been looking for a way to take control of that terminal for months. Didn't like that the client security officer had insisted I maintain sole custody. Didn't like that I was the only one who understood the authentication protocols. He'd called it a single point of failure in 4 separate meetings, always with that edge in his voice that meant he thought I was being territorial. Maybe I was. Or maybe I just understood that some systems aren't designed to be democratized. When you're handling Department of Defense contracts, security isn't about being flexible. It's about being careful. It's about understanding that 180 families go home with paychecks because someone followed the procedures exactly as written. My phone buzzed. Text from my daughter, Sarah. "Dad, can we talk about Jake's tuition soon? The payment deadline is next month and I'm getting nervous about the numbers." Jake was my grandson, 19 years old, sophomore at State studying engineering, smart kid like his mom. I'd promised I'd cover half his tuition through my retirement savings, the kind of promise you make when you think your job is secure and your pension is solid. I gathered my things slowly. Laptop in the bag, coffee mug off the desk, phone buzzing with another text about a family barbecue this weekend. Out of habit, I pulled up the feed status on my personal device. Offline, completely dark. Marcus wouldn't notice right away. He'd grab lunch, maybe check in with Howard Barnes, the CFO who'd sponsored his hiring. Probably tell him he'd finally dealt with that Navy relic who was slowing down progress, but I knew what was coming. The DoD audit window opened at 5 p.m. The client's operations team would be standing by, expecting the green status indicators that only my terminal could provide. The compliance officer would run her checklist, and when she got to line item 12, real-time system monitoring, she'd find nothing but dead air. 15,000 in penalties per day, plus the very real possibility that the client would invoke the termination clause and walk away from the whole contract. 18 people looking for new jobs. My retirement timeline shot to hell. I should have gone home, should have let Marcus figure it out on his own. But here's the thing about working in this business for 3 decades, especially with my Navy background, you develop a sense for how disasters unfold. And I wanted to see this one happen in real time. So instead of heading for the parking garage, I took the elevator down to the small cafe that overlooked our building's main entrance. Ordered coffee, found a seat by the window with a clear view. The waitress, a woman about my age named Betty, brought over my usual black coffee, no sugar. We'd been doing this dance for 5 years. Rough day already? She asked. Getting there, I said. She refilled my mug without being asked. Sometimes the worst days start with the smallest things going wrong. She was right about that. But she didn't know that sometimes the worst days for one person turn out to be exactly what someone else has been waiting for. 45 minutes later, Marcus came back from lunch. Tie loose, phone in one hand, looking pleased with himself. The kind of relaxed you only get when you think you've made a smart move. He had a sandwich wrapper in his other hand and was walking with that confident stride that meant he'd probably spent lunch telling someone about his morning victory. He didn't see them at first. Carol Matthews, our COO, stood near the reception desk in her gray suit. Carol had been with the company for 12 years, worked her way up from project coordinator. She knew every contract we had, every client relationship that mattered. Next to her was Linda Rodriguez, the client's senior procurement officer. Both had that particular tension in their shoulders that means someone's day is about to get significantly worse. I sipped my coffee and watched through the window. Carol said something. Marcus stopped walking mid-stride, the sandwich wrapper in his hand tilted slightly. Linda held up her phone, screen angled toward him. Even from a floor away, I could see his face change. Confusion first, then that slow creeping realization that something had gone very wrong. Carol turned toward the elevators. Marcus followed, still trying to talk, still trying to explain. His hands were moving now, the way they did when he was presenting to clients. All gestures, no substance. Linda walked behind them, arms crossed, expression flat. She had the look of someone who'd driven 2 hours from the client site specifically to have this conversation. They were heading for the server room. I knew because that's where anyone would go when they realized a critical DoD system had gone dark 6 hours before a compliance audit. I finished my coffee and stood up. Betty nodded as I left a tip on the table. "See you tomorrow," she said. "We'll see about that," I replied. "Time to go back to work." When I stepped back onto our floor, the energy had changed. You know how an office feels when something's gone wrong. Conversations drop to whispers. People glance toward closed doors. Everyone suddenly has urgent work at their desk. The kind of urgent work that doesn't actually require much concentration, just enough to look busy while you listen for updates. Deanna Torres was still at her cubicle, but her screen showed a news website instead of engineering software. She spotted me and straightened up. "Carl, hey. Thought you left early." Grabbed coffee downstairs, I said. "What's going on?" She glanced around, then leaned closer. The monitoring feed's down. Clients here. Marcus is in the server room with Carol, and from what Glenn heard through the door, it's not going well. Glenn Foster was our IT support guy, 15 years with the company, the kind of person who knows where all the bodies are buried because he helped dig half the graves. If Glenn was hearing things, it meant the situation had moved beyond quiet conference room discussions into the realm of raised voices and emergency phone calls. I nodded like this was news to me. Rough timing with the audit today. Yeah. She gestured toward the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Marcus pacing, hands on his hips. Carol sat at the table with her phone pressed to her ear, taking notes on a legal pad. Linda Rodriguez stood by the window, perfectly still, watching Marcus like she was cataloging every word for a report that would end up in somebody's personnel file. The thing was, I'd been through this exact scenario before. Different manager, different contract, same basic stupidity. Back in 2009, we had a VP named Richards who decided our backup protocols were too complicated. Simplified them right into a 3-day system failure that cost us a $1.8 million Navy contract. Richards lasted another 6 weeks after that. I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. Around me, people were trying to look busy while clearly tracking the drama. Glenn walked past, tablet in hand, expression grim. He caught my eye and gave a small shake of his head. Nothing good. The thing about systems like ours is they're not designed to fail gracefully. That monitoring terminal had encrypted authentication tokens that refreshed every 72 hours through the client's security server. It was like a digital handshake that proved we were who we said we were. Disconnect improperly, and their system assumes we've been compromised. It rejects any reconnection attempt until you complete a full compliance review. Paperwork, approvals, security officers sign off, background checks, the works. Usually takes 5 to 7 days if everyone cooperates and nothing gets flagged for additional review. I'd explained this to Marcus multiple times. Not just mentioned it in passing, but sat him down with printed documentation and walked him through every step. Last November, I'd sent him an 8-page memo with flowcharts and timeline estimates. In February, during our quarterly security review, I'd made him a PowerPoint presentation because I knew that's how his brain worked. Colorful slides with bullet points and risk matrices. His response every time, this is exactly the kind of complexity that slows us down. We need to simplify our architecture. You can't simplify federal security protocols. You can only follow them or break them. My phone buzzed. Text from Glenn. They're asking if we can restore from backup? Told them no. Security tokens don't work that way. You around? I typed back at my desk. 30 seconds later, my desk phone rang. Carol's extension. Carl, can you come to conference room B? On my way. The walk to the conference room felt longer than usual. I passed Marcus's office. Door closed, blinds drawn. His assistant wasn't at her desk. Bad sign. When executive assistants disappear, it usually means they've been told to make themselves scarce while the cleanup happens. The conference room felt smaller with 6 people in it. Carol sat at the head of the table reading something on her phone. Linda had taken the chair opposite, legal pad in front of her, pen capped. Glenn stood by the projector, arms crossed. Deanna Torres sat near the door, looking like she wished she was somewhere else. Marcus leaned against the wall near the whiteboard, trying to look casual, but I could see the sweat stains under his arms. Carl, Carol said without looking up, walk us through what happened this morning. I pulled out the chair and sat down. At 1:11:15, Marcus instructed me to shut down my workstation. I asked if he wanted a session logout or full system shutdown. He said full shutdown. I confirmed termination of the live client connection. He confirmed I executed the shutdown at 11:17 and logged it in the system audit. Linda wrote something down. Marcus shifted his weight against the wall. You knew this would sever the monitoring feed? Carol asked. Yes. I also knew it couldn't be reconnected without going through the full NIST compliance cycle. Minimum 72 hours, assuming the client cooperates immediately. And you didn't think to mention that, Marcus said from the wall. His voice had that controlled edge he used when he was trying to sound reasonable. You just did what I asked without any pushback. I turned to look at him. I confirmed the order twice. You've told me in 5 separate meetings not to overcomplicate things with technical details. You said last month, and I quote, I need doers, not debaters. His jaw tightened. That's taking it out of context. The audit log has timestamps, I said. The conversation happened exactly as I described. Carol set her phone down. What's the fastest path to restoration? If the client prioritizes it, we can start the authentication cycle today. Best case, we're back online Monday morning. Worst case, Thursday. That's assuming their security officer doesn't flag this as a compliance violation requiring additional review. Which she might, Linda said quietly, given that the feed went dark during an audit window. Our compliance team has specific protocols for system failures during review periods. Nobody said anything for a moment. The HVAC hummed. Someone's phone vibrated against the table. Diana was taking notes, trying to look invisible. The audit's postponed. Linda continued. Our compliance team is documenting the outage. I need a written explanation of what happened and who authorized it. She looked directly at Marcus. From you by end of business today. Marcus nodded. I'll have it to you by 5. Make sure it's accurate, Carol said. Her tone was flat, but the emphasis on accurate landed, like a warning. We'll be cross-referencing everything with the system logs and meeting notes. She turned to me. Carl, I need you to coordinate the restoration. Work directly with Linda's security officer. Copy me on everything. Understood. That's all for now, Carol said. But I could tell from the way she was looking at Marcus that this conversation was just getting started. Glenn left first, then Linda. Carol gathered her things without looking at anyone. When she passed Marcus on her way out, she said quietly, "My office, 15 minutes." Diana followed Carol out, giving me a small nod as she passed. The kind of nod that says I saw everything and I'll remember it if anyone asks. Then it was just Marcus and me. He pushed off from the wall and walked over to where I was still sitting, stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. I could smell his cologne, something expensive that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. You could help me here, you know. Help you how? Tell Carol, this was a miscommunication, that you didn't make the risks clear, something that spreads the responsibility around. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him. Really looked at him. Marcus was 34 years old, MBA from Columbia. 8 years of consulting experience that mostly involved telling other people how to do their jobs better. He'd been with our company for 14 months. In that time, he'd reorganized 3 departments, implemented 2 new project management systems, and held approximately 47 meetings about improving efficiency. What he hadn't done was learn how our actual systems worked. Marcus, I said, I confirmed your order twice. That's in the log. I sent you the security protocols memo 8 months ago. That's in the email archive. I've raised concerns about single-point authentication in 5 meetings. Glenn has the notes with your signature on the attendance sheets. So what? You're just going to throw me under the bus. I'm going to tell the truth. That's not throwing anyone anywhere. That's just stating what happened. His face flushed. You know what your problem is? You think being technically right makes you right. But leadership is about more than following procedures. It's about being flexible, adaptive. Is that what you're calling this? Adaptive leadership. Careful, Carl. His voice dropped. You're 2 years from full retirement. You want to spend that time making enemies? I stood up slowly, looked at him straight on. I've been here 30 years, built half the systems we run on, trained most of the people in this department. My reputation isn't based on who likes me. It's based on whether things work when they're supposed to. I picked up my notebook and walked past him toward the door. Carl, I stopped but didn't turn around. If this goes badly for me, he said, it's going to go badly for you too. I'll make sure of it. The audit log doesn't care who threatens whom. I said, it just records what happened. I left him standing there and went back to my desk. My inbox was already filling up. Message from the client security officer with subject line, authentication cycle requirements, urgent. Another from Carol, status meeting 8 a.m. tomorrow. Prepare comprehensive timeline and documentation. That last part was interesting. Comprehensive documentation. Carol was building a case. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Restoration Oct. 2024. Started pulling files, the original security protocol memo I'd sent Marcus 8 months ago. Email exchanges about authentication procedures. Meeting notes where I'd flagged the risks. Photos I'd taken of whiteboards during our quarterly reviews because I'd learned years ago that people have selective memory about what they agreed to in meetings. Not because I'd been planning for this moment, just because I'd been doing my job the way the Navy taught me. Document everything. Assume nothing. Trust but verify. My phone rang. Unknown number. Carl Henderson. Speaking. This is Nancy Phillips, security officer for the client. Linda Rodriguez gave me your number. I understand you're coordinating the restoration effort. Nancy Phillips, I knew that name from the security protocols documentation. Former Air Force, 12 years in cybersecurity. She'd been the one who insisted on single custody access for our terminal in the first place. That's correct, I said. I'm starting the authentication cycle on our end. You'll have the token package by 2 p.m. I need you to run validation sequences and send me the hash results by end of day. We'll do that. Her tone shifted slightly. For what it's worth, I reviewed the incident report Linda sent over. Your documentation looks solid. Not everyone maintains audit trails that thoroughly. Thanks. Let's get this system back online. We ended the call. I looked at the clock, 1:30 p.m. Marcus would be in Carol's office right now, probably trying to explain how this was all some kind of misunderstanding, how he'd been trying to improve efficiency, and I'd failed to communicate the risks properly. The problem was I had communicated the risks multiple times, in writing. With witnesses, around 2:15, Diana stopped by my desk. Most of the office had cleared out for lunch, but she'd been at her computer all day. "You doing okay?" "Fine. You?" She glanced toward the executive offices. Marcus hadn't come back from his meeting with Carol. Been a long day. For what it's worth, I saw this coming months ago when he first started talking about consolidating access. Yeah, she lowered her voice. I kept notes from those meetings too. The ones where you explain the authentication process. I take notes on everything because my memory isn't perfect, but I never thought they'd actually be important. They might be now, I said. You need anything for the restoration? Not yet. Client security officer is sending over the requirements. I'll loop you in once I know what we're working with. She nodded and headed back to her desk. Smart kid. She understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do is pay attention and remember what you saw. At 2:45, the token package arrived. Nancy Phillips had included detailed instructions and a checklist that would take about 3 hours to complete properly. I printed everything out, organized it in a binder, and started the first validation sequence. My desk phone rang again. Carol's extension. "Carl, can you come up to my office? On my way?" Carol's office was on the executive floor, corner office with windows overlooking the parking garage. She had 12 years of service awards on the wall and a photo of her family at some kind of corporate retreat. Husband, 2 kids, everyone wearing matching polo shirts and forced smiles. "Close the door," she said. I did and took the chair across from her desk. "How long have we worked together, Carl? Since you started as project coordinator, 2012, 12 years. And in all that time, have you ever seen me throw someone under the bus who didn't deserve it?" "No." She leaned forward. "Marcus is in trouble. The kind of trouble that ends careers. Terry's flying back from the client visit early. He'll be here tomorrow morning. And he's not happy." I didn't say anything. "I need to ask you directly, and I need you to be completely honest. Did Marcus receive adequate warning about the consequences of shutting down that terminal?" "Yes. Multiple times in writing and in person." "Can you prove it?" "I can," she nodded. "Good, because tomorrow morning, we're going to need every piece of documentation we can get. This isn't just about Marcus anymore. The client is questioning whether we're competent to handle DoD contracts. If we lose their confidence, it's not just 180 jobs, it's our entire defense sector business." She opened a file folder on her desk. "I've been going through Marcus's performance reviews. He's been here 14 months. In that time, he's had 3 conflicts with technical staff, 2 client complaints, and now this. Terry hired him to modernize our operations, but modernization doesn't mean ignoring regulations. The meeting tomorrow," I said. "What should I expect? The truth?" "Just tell the truth. Let the documentation speak for itself." I stood up to leave. "Carl, one more thing. Whatever Marcus said to you in that conference room about retirement, about making things difficult for you, forget it. That man's not going to be in a position to hurt anyone's career after tomorrow." I walked back to my desk thinking about something my old chief petty officer used to say on the submarine. The reactor doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about whether you followed the procedures or not. Everything else is just noise. I stayed late that night organizing files, running validation tests, preparing the timeline Carol wanted. By the time I shut down my laptop, the office was mostly empty. Marcus's office was dark when I walked past. His assistant's desk had been cleared out. Another bad sign. The next morning, I got to the office at 7:30. The parking lot was fuller than usual for that time of day. I recognized Terry Walsh's BMW in the executive parking spot, which meant he'd caught an early flight back from the client site. At 8:15, an email landed from Susan Clark in HR. "Please forward all documentation related to Tuesday's events. Everything you have, no later than 8:45. Susan and I went back 20 years. She'd been the HR coordinator when I first made senior engineer. We'd worked together through 2 merger integrations and the 2008 layoffs. She didn't ask for documentation unless she was building a file for legal purposes. I sent her the folder I'd compiled. Security protocol memos, email chains, meeting notes, the audit log entry with its timestamp. 8 years of conversations about authentication procedures, all organized chronologically with a table of contents. Her reply came back in 3 minutes. Received. Thank you. Carl, you might want to bring printed copies of everything to the meeting this morning. That was it. No questions, no commentary. Professional distance, the kind you maintain when something's about to go legal. At 8:58, I walked to the big conference room. Terry was already there, standing at the head of the table with a printed document in his hand. Carol sat to his right. Susan had set up at the far end with her laptop and 3 different colored pens. Glenn was connecting his tablet to the projector. Linda Rodriguez had dialed in remotely, her face filling one of the screens on the wall. Marcus came in last, carrying a leather portfolio. He'd dressed up today, full suit instead of his usual business casual. He took the seat farthest from Terry. Nobody made small talk. Terry set the document down. Linda, thank you for joining. I want to start by acknowledging that we've put your team in a difficult position. Our focus this morning is understanding exactly what happened and determining next steps. Linda's voice came through the speakers, clear and controlled. Appreciate it, Terry. For the record, our compliance team has formally documented the outage. We're holding on the termination clause for now, but we need a complete explanation before we can move forward. Understood. Terry turned to Carol. Walk us through it. Carol opened her tablet. At 11:17 Tuesday morning, our monitoring terminal went offline. This severed the live feed to your operations center 6 hours before a scheduled DAT-OD compliance audit. The system cannot be reconnected without completing a full authentication cycle, which requires 72 to 96 hours minimum. Who authorized the shutdown? Terry asked. Carol looked at Marcus. Marcus gave the instruction to Carl Henderson at 11:15. Carl confirmed the order twice before executing it. Terry's eyes moved to Marcus. Is that accurate? Marcus opened his portfolio and pulled out a printed email. I gave an instruction to consolidate system access. What I didn't anticipate was that this particular terminal had unique authentication requirements that would trigger a multi-day lockout. Carl, Terry said, not looking away from Marcus. Did you know shutting down that terminal would sever the client feed? Yes, I said. Did you inform Marcus of the consequences? I asked him twice if he wanted to proceed. Once when he gave the initial order and again specifically about terminating the live connection. He confirmed both times. Glenn pulled up the audit log on the projector. There it was, blown up on the screen in 14-point font. 11717217 minus client monitoring feed terminated per management instruction. Below it, Glenn overlaid my terminal session log. 2 confirmation prompts, both acknowledged. Timestamps matching to the second. Marcus leaned forward. Those prompts don't explain the consequences. They're just yes-no questions. I needed context. You received context, I said. Last November, I sent you an 8-page memo on monitoring authentication protocols. In February, I walked you through it during our quarterly security review. In July, I flagged it again when you proposed consolidating terminal access. Susan pulled up something on her laptop. I have all 3 instances documented. Emails are in the file Carl sent this morning. The February meeting notes are in our shared drive with your signature on the attendance sheet. Marcus's face flushed. He looked at his portfolio like it might contain a better answer than the one he'd prepared. Terry was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was level but hard. Help me understand your thinking. You received multiple warnings about authentication protocols. You got 2 confirmation requests during the shutdown, and you still authorized it 6 hours before a federal compliance audit. Why? I was trying to address a structural vulnerability, Marcus said. We had single operator control on a critical system. That's not scalable. That's not modern architecture. It was compliant architecture, Carol said. The client security officer specifically required single custody access for NIST 800 to 171. That's not our policy. That's federal regulation. Linda's voice came through the speakers. For clarification, we insisted on single custody because distributed access creates more vulnerability points, not fewer. The authentication lockout exists to prevent unauthorized reconnection attempts. This isn't bureaucracy. It's how we maintain security clearance on DoD contracts. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Terry picked up the document he'd been holding. I received a call last night from Howard Barnes. He suggested we frame this as a communication breakdown, spread the accountability around. He looked at Marcus. I'm not doing that. The room went very still. Based on the documentation, you received adequate warning. You ignored it. You authorized a shutdown during a critical window, and now we're facing penalties and possible contract termination. Terry set the paper down. Effective immediately. You're on paid administrative leave pending final review. Susan will coordinate next steps. Marcus sat back like he'd been pushed. Terry, I've been working to modernize our operations. I've brought in new frameworks, new efficiency models. You shut down a 3-2 contract. Terry said, That's not innovation. That's negligence. Susan closed her laptop. Marcus, your network access will be suspended at noon. Security will meet you at your office to collect company property. You'll remain available for follow-up questions. Marcus looked around the table like someone might object. Nobody did. He gathered his portfolio and stood up. This is a mistake. You're making me the scapegoat for a systemic problem. The system worked fine until Tuesday, Carol said quietly. The problem was overriding it. Marcus left without closing the door behind him. We all sat there for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. Terry turned to me. What do you need to restore the feed? I pulled out my timeline. Client security officer started the authentication cycle yesterday. We run validation tests this afternoon. If everything clears, we reconnect Friday at 6 a.m. Full monitoring capability by noon. Confidence level high, assuming the client cooperates. Linda's voice came back measured. We'll cooperate, but Terry, we need assurance this doesn't happen again. Our contract requires stable access to that feed. If we can't count on it, we'll need to reconsider the relationship. Understood, Terry said. He looked at Carol, then at me. We're going to restructure how we handle critical client systems. Carl, you'll lead that project. I'm also moving you to VP of Infrastructure Security, effective today. We need someone in that role who understands that compliance isn't optional. I didn't say anything for a second. 30 years and I'd never been in the room when someone got promoted. It always happened behind closed doors through HR channels with formal offer letters. I'll do it, I said. Good. Terry stood up. Let's get the feed restored. Everything else can wait. 2 weeks later, we had the system back online and running smoother than it had in months. I spent my days training Diana Torres on the new protocols, documenting everything for the next generation of engineers who'd eventually take over when I retired. 3 months after that, I heard through the industry grapevine that Marcus had landed at a fintech startup. They'd announced him as VP of Digital Innovation on LinkedIn. Good for him. Startups move fast and break things. Sometimes that's what they need. But 8 months later, the startup folded. Marcus sent me a LinkedIn message asking if I'd be a reference for his job search. I read the message twice, then closed my laptop. Some things don't need a response. The audit log speaks for itself. I've got 18 months until full retirement now. Maybe I'll take it. Maybe I'll stay on as a consultant. Either way, I'll leave behind systems that work, documentation that's clear, and people who understand that some procedures exist for good reasons. That's the legacy I want. Not titles or promotions or winning office politics, just systems that keep running and people who know how to keep them that way. Jake starts his junior year next month. His tuition is covered. Sarah doesn't have to worry about the numbers anymore. Sometimes doing your job the right way is its own reward. In the end, documentation isn't just paperwork, it's proof that you cared enough about your job to do it right, even when nobody was watching. The difference between a professional and someone just collecting a paycheck isn't what they know, it's what they do when management makes the wrong call.